Now that we talked more about foundational approach to tarot, let's talk a little bit about why this approach is so important. I know it parallels very much Jungian therapy, but it doesn't necessarily make it important, right? So what's the big deal? Why can't you just keep reading tarot cards intuitively, subjectively? Why can't you just keep reading tarot cards using a set of traditional meanings that is foundational within the tarot? Why is that in of itself not enough? Well, it's a really good question. And to answer that, we need to look at the tarot market today, because the tarot market today is inundated with so many tarot decks. There's such a prolific amount of tarot decks on the market. And as I speak, there's a deck coming out every second right now on the market. You know this, I know this. You probably have an extensive tarot library at home. I have an extensive, well, somewhat extensive tarot library at home. So if you look at the tarot community today, tarot in the tarot market has really swayed far away from traditional. Traditional, by the way, is so debatable, but what I mean by traditional in quotes is tarot decks that seem to be traditional in a sense of, we're talking about Rider-Waite-Smith, Zos, and Tarot de Marseille, right? So today we have so many tarot decks that have far departure from traditional tarot cards, and that's really actually not a bad thing. I know some people may disagree and think that's bad because it plays with esoteric and exoteric function of the tarot, but for psychologists and reading tarot psychologically, it's actually a really good thing, because it allows for a variety of images to interact with your psyche. Your psyche loves images, remember, so it's the language of the psyche. And this is especially becomes important if you use tarot, like I said, for self-growth, for self-healing, for any kind of self-development, for connecting to your psyche, because psyche, again, loves images. It adores variety to be able to communicate with you. It wants to have more different decks, more variation of the decks in order to find the language to communicate with you. For that reason, it's actually a good thing. So today we have a lot of decks, as you know, depicting not only different people from different cultures and backgrounds, but also different sexuality, different genders. We also have decks that are different in genres, right? We have decks ranging from, oh my God, fantasy to sci-fi to you name it. There's probably a deck, a Freudian deck perhaps, depicting psychoanalysis in of itself. There's also decks of different themes. There's animal decks, we have flower decks, we have crystal decks, we have stone decks, we have decks of unicorns. I mean, you name it, it's all out there. There's even religious decks, decks that are focusing on Christianity, or decks that are focusing on Catholicism, or decks that are focusing on any other form of religion. There's also mythological decks imbibed with mythology. So whatever you really want to think of, you can definitely find it on the tarot market. Again, we're really swayed far away from traditional tarot. And as you can see, this departure modifies how we interact and how we read images, and modifies how we approach images. I know this is going to sound very funny, but I even found a pug tarot. I kid you not, as you see on the screen right now, there's the tarot depicting pugs. So there's literally a deck for everything out there. And as I said, a variety of tarot decks is really beneficial to your psyche. It really is, because psyche wants to have access to different images. It wants to find little nuances to talk to you. The more nuance, the more decks you have, the more psyche is excited, because this is why sometimes you gravitate toward a particular deck and not the other, because your psyche is calling for particular imagery. So again, to have proliferation of different decks is not a bad thing. The problem actually becomes in working with tarot deck created by an artist. And let me explain to you it a little bit first, because people get very confused, like, what do you mean that's a problem? Well, it becomes a problem because you're no longer working with traditional tarot deck, right? You're working now with a deck that is created by that artist. And so you probably can't, although you can, but it may be challenging to apply traditional tarot meanings. And this is why sometimes we all run into problems. It's actually no longer becomes a point where you're looking at collectively agreed upon depiction of the images that we agreed upon in tarot community. You're no longer looking at the same meaning of maybe a particular card, because the artist has their own way of expressing it. So when you're really working with a deck created by another person, you're actually, what you're doing, you're working with their inner world. Okay, whether you realize it or not, you're actually looking at their internal, subjective, image library. And yes, there is such a thing as internal subjective image library. And in the next lesson, I will discuss much more in detail what that internal subjective image library is and how it tends to work. But this is where the problem arises, and this is why the foundational method is so instrumental and important. Some decks, sure, you can still apply traditional tarot meanings to, but I know for a fact, because I have a lot of different decks, there's decks that are so different, and in imagery, this sway so far away, and I'll give you an example in the next lesson. This way have swayed so far away from some of the traditional applications that when we try to apply the traditional symbolic meaning of a particular card, it doesn't quite fit, right? I'm sure you had the same problem as I have. And when it doesn't fit, we try to make it fit, and that's a problem. So the premise of the foundational approach is that it teaches you how to go to the core, to the ontological objective essence of the meaning of the image. And when you do that, from then on, you can build up your foundation up, and that's where the readings become really, really deep and really saturated. And I'll give you a lot of examples how to do that. But now let's go to lesson 2 and talk a little bit more about what is this inner subjective archetypal library, and where does it come from.